All right, so full disclosure, I recorded this whole thing, and then when I was done, I realized that I never pressed record on the video. So the following audio is the original audio, which means that these are all my proper reactions, but the video is not the original video. So if the sound and the video don't quite sync, that's why. Sorry about that. Enjoy the video. All right, so it is a very early Monday morning because I got up early and I thought about starting my work on the prep to review the Two Naughty Boys Back on the Ropes, the second Two Naughty Boys book. I did the first one already. You can check a link to that in the description. And I realized that I actually haven't cracked this book in a very long time, and I don't really remember what's in it. So I started looking through it. I thought to myself, maybe people want to see what my second first impressions are of this book as I go through. So I did see a couple things when I first opened it that I want to go through. Um, the safety section is slightly longer, and it's got a new piece of advice that I think is excellent, which is don't let your partner's submissiveness interfere with safety. A lot of bottoms, models, people you work with will try to tough things out because they think that's what a good bottom, submissive model, whatever, should be doing. And that will get in the way of a lot of safety. So you want to make sure that you let your bottom know ahead of time, hey, if anything's wrong, don't tough anything out. None of the rope is supposed to hurt unless I tell you ahead of time it's supposed to hurt. So don't tough anything out. If there's a problem, let me know, and just maintain that communication at all times. So moving on to the actual meat of the book, though, because really it's just some safety. There's an intro, which is almost the same as the last book. It's slightly longer. You'll also notice it's in color this time, which is also super nice. But we have the knots. We have the square knot again. I mean, any book about rope needs to have a square knot in it because it's the probably one of, if not the most important knot in all of rope work. The split square knot, I, I, I honestly don't see a use for that, so that's whatever. I am going to nitpick here. This is not a double slip knot. This is a double slipped overhand knot. A double slip knot would be one that would be two ropes passing through itself so that it tightens up on itself. That is not what this is. It is just an overhand knot that's slipped, which means that you don't pull the entire working end through the knot. You leave a little bit out so you can pull on it to undo the knot. So technically, this is a double slipped knot, not a double slip knot. But, nitpicking. Double coin knot, I actually just recorded a quick tutorial on how to tie that. Please look forward to it on the off chance this is up before that video is. More decorative knots that you're never going to tie. I've actually tied a flower knot. It is kind of pretty, but once again, not terribly useful. Sliding sheet bend. I'm really glad this knot's actually in here because this one is rather useful. What this allows you to do is to do a loop and tie a knot in it, and then you can pinch the knot. You can pinch the knot and you can slide it up and down the rope, and when you let go of the rope, or let go of the knot, it opens up a little bit and it catches and it no longer slides. So the sliding sheet bend is actually an excellent knot. It doesn't have a lot of practical use, but it can solve problems that you may have with tension or when you need to tie a knot or tie a rope with tension, but you don't know the tension is going to be ahead of time. So this is a great addition to this book. So really proud of that one. So these clever tricks. Not sure how clever most of them are. So there's a rope strap, which is basically just braiding in line, I think is the technical name in the rope world for that. So you just form a loop and you braid around it. So under, over, until you get a braided line. And then they show a couple uses for that. This is just a infinity braid in line. So once again, it's just braiding the rope in on itself. And you can use the support things, I suppose. Personally, I would much prefer to tie an actual bowline of some kind snug around a thigh or an ankle or whatever column you want, because then you can manage the tension. You don't have to worry about it wrapping, you don't have it rolling, you don't have to worry about it shifting because it's actually tied in place. I can see uses for this, but I can't think off the top of my head of any use for this that would be better than using an actual bowline. Speaking of which, bowlines. So this is a French bowline shackle. I don't know why they keep calling things shackles. This is just a French bowline with multiple turns. So you would call it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turn bowline, depending how many ones you did. So this would be a 1, 2, 3, 4 turn bowline. So the French bowline is a lovely knot. It actually was the standard for single column restraints back when this book was published, which was, I want to say 2010, am I right? 2009, I was close. So that actually was the standard for single column restraints back in the 20 aughts, back in 2009 when this book was published. It's no longer the standard for single column restraints. The standard for single column restraints these days is actually a new knot, a newer knot called the Somerville bowline, which I will be doing a tutorial of very shortly. I started to record that today, but I don't think it's clear how to tie it if I'm tying it by myself. So I may need to borrow a column from somebody to tie on them so I can properly demo how the tie works. So look forward to that as well. So cross-armed bow knot. Oh, I see what it is. That's a figure eight knot. Okay, so that's just a funky way of tying a bow knot, which it's a slip knot. So I would not recommend actually using this in practice unless you're going to tie off the slipping end so it can't slip. And if you're going to do that, you might as well do a standard lark's head style double column. Same thing with prisoner cuffs. So you do your wraps and you pass ropes through. What you don't realize is these two trailing ends, I guess they would both be working ends, considering there's no preference of side. If you were to grab and pull on either one of those, it would tighten the knot. So that's once again a slipping knot, and I really don't recommend tying those around, individual columns. I would only recommend tying that around rope or something inanimate that won't get hurt by a rope suddenly tightening up. The quick gripper is exactly the same thing. You just fold them up and put them on the person. Zip snare, how does that work? You do your loops, you pass your rope through. What is up with all these slip knots? All of them are dangerous. I don't understand. Was this really the standard back in like 2005 to 2009? Because I was active at the time because I was fresh out of high school, and I got active around when I was 20, which would have been 2007. So I was active when these books were being written, and I don't understand why they have so many slip knots in them. They were already known to be dangerous. So I just don't understand. The monkey fist ball gag. I have tied this a couple times. The bit gag from the previous book I think is more useful because it's quicker to tie. The real reason to learn a monkey fist knot, which is all this really is, just a monkey fist knot, is that it allows you to put a weight on the end of a rope without needing to tie something to the rope. So the last time I actually tied this was when I was helping my family bring down a tree that was close to the home, and we wanted to make sure the tree fell away from the house, and we didn't have a weight handy to tie onto a rope. We had a rope handy because it's me. I always have a rope handy, but I didn't have a proper weight to tie onto it. So they went to go find something, and I realized, like, wait, I know this knot because I got this book, and I know this knot. So I tied a monkey fist in the rope I had then, threw it up into the tree, got it knotted up, and I was ready to go before people came back with something heavy to tie to it. So that's the real reason why the monkey fist knot exists in the first place. But it does work as a gag. Um, I would recommend if you are using rope gags that you use it with synthetic rope as pictured, because the natural rope takes forever to dry for whatever reason, and natural rope is harder to sanitize. Oh, hey, look, there's the bit gag I was just talking about. And this is exactly how I tie it too. You just form a loop, you turn around, pass the rope through, call it done. It's actually very similar to how you tie a noose. So if you know how to tie a noose, then you would know how to tie one of these. So the only difference is with a noose is that you loop the other end as well, so that you end up with this end, I guess, with a long loop, so that it forms a noose instead. And there we go. Unique iterations. Let's see how unique they are. Hey, look, it's our cat's paw again, which I really don't recommend. I did do a tutorial on how to tie it because it is quick and easy. I'm gonna be showing off the Somerville at some point soon, which is a much better knot. So the cat's paw on a bare foot. So so it's a cat's paw around the ankle, and then you have running half hitches going down the rest of the foot. That's not terrible. It's not great either, because what you end up with is this rope here that they're just showing rolling off the toe. Presumably you're tying that off to something, and presumably your bottom is going to struggle a little bit, because let's be fair, bottoms like to struggle in their bonds. It's half the fun, right? And each half hitch is a slip knot of its own. So that rope is going to tighten this wrap, and it's also going to pull on this rope, which is going to tighten this wrap, which is going to pull on this rope, which the cat's paw probably isn't going to slip from this position, because it's not going to be because the force is going to be significantly reduced at this point. But I totally wouldn't recommend it. Rope flogging cuffs. Oh, it's exactly the same thing. It's just wrapped around the hand as well. At least they put a knot here, so it's a loop, and then it's a half hitch. Actually, in this application, you'd probably call it an overhand knot in the rope, so that at least that won't slip. So that's decent. Let's see. This is how to tie a rope shackle, which I believe was from the previous book, in hand. So when you're tying knots, there are 3 terms for tying knots. There's in place, or in situ, which is when you're tying things like that are in front of you. There's tying on a table, which is when you tie on a table. Typically, this refers to flat knots, or knots that you need to like lay out. Most of these fancy knots in the beginning would be tied on the table, because they require you to do things like pattern out the rope like this, and then fold them over, and then fold them in. So you need a table space. It'd be really hard to tie this knot in hand, which is the third one. Tying in hand means you don't have a table, you don't have anything to tie to, but you're just tying the knot freestyle in your hand. So that's the rope shackle from the previous book, tied in hand. That's the only difference there. This is the ankle wrap from the last book. Nothing new there. Oh yeah, this is just talking about playing a game with it where you pull on the ropes and see if your bottom can stay upright. I played something similar. It's kind of fun. Basic wrap is from the last book. I don't understand why they use this particular variation. This is a very Western variation, which there's nothing wrong with using Western rope styles. Most of the people doing rope these days prefer to work with the Japanese style, the shibari style, shibari, kenbaku, whatever you want to call it. So there's not a lot of difference between the different styles in terms of usefulness and practicality. That being said, the Japanese version of this is much faster to tie, so I don't know why we're going with the Western version. Although all of this is more or less correct. It can support weight, you can pull on it, you can hook it onto things. It's great as a body control device. I will be showing the Japanese version of this at some point in the future as well. Um, why are they calling it a prone tie? It's just a reverse hog tie. You're just tying the ankles to the wrists and front instead of behind. Um, so the weakness of a knot like this, so that's all it is. It's a basic wrap. It's being secured to ankles while your bottom is face down, presumably forcing them into like, a butt up, head down position. The weakness here is that there's nothing to prevent them from rolling, and if they roll, then they get most of their mobility back. So it might be fun if you're tying, if you're starting with this and then further securing them, but I don't know, it just doesn't tickle my particular fancy. Oh, hey, look, the decorative stuff that is totally not useful. Um, so rope belt buckle. I have a friend who actually did use a rope belt for a while because he was new to rope and he thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Rigger gauntlets is so so this is just a rope corset tied on the wrist. I have done this at events to like let everybody know it's like, hey, I do the rope thing, and I don't think I ever got any more attention because of it. I also don't like this particular variation of it because you're actually pulling the loop through each previous turn and then pulling it all the way out. If you actually don't pull it all the way out and slip each one, then it means that when you're done, you can just pull the whole thing off and it comes off in one smooth motion. Tying it like this, if for some reason you need to use that rope, it takes forever to untie, which is super annoying. Double coin shirt. Okay, cool, but why? I need to go through and censor this book. A rope blindfold. I don't know why you'd bother with the fancy weaving. Just wrap the rope around the eyes, and that works beautifully for me. Prosperity glove looks cool, I guess. So I don't understand how they expect this hair corset to stay in the hair, especially on this particular model, because it looks like her hair is freshly washed. It's very shiny. If you know you're going to be doing rope on hair ahead of time, you should let your bottom know and tell them not to wash their hair because rope sticks in dirty hair dirty hair significantly better than it does in clean hair. The clean hair just doesn't have enough coefficient of friction. Let me get a sip of tea over here. Ah, it's good stuff. A rope collar. I prefer to just tie a Somerville around the neck because that's a non-slipping knot and it's way faster. This is really pretty though, so if you want to turn this into a to an everyday collar, then that's a very pretty variation. So I'm not going to fault that one too much. Maximum exposure. The samurai tie. That is okay. So it's funny this is called a samurai tie because the one thing you almost never see in Japanese style rope and in shibari is this yoke formation. This is a very Western thing to do. So a yoke is when the rope passes over the shoulders, across the back of the neck, across the other shoulder. And you see that all the time, like I said, in Western styles, but you don't see it a lot in Japanese styles. Also, historically, when samurai were tying prisoners, you would tie a number of knots that was equal or inversely equal to the station of the person you were tying. The thought being that the more honorable person wouldn't run, so you don't actually need to tie knots. So if you were tying a high-ranking official or an enemy samurai, wouldn't use any knots at all. You would just use frictions. And if you're tying, some random thug on the street, you would knot them up because, what honor does that person have? They're just gonna run if they can get loose. So the fact that there's, a knots here and knots here, and there's, I guess it's technically a friction, not a knot, and knots here is kind of funny to me because the person is being very disrespectful to the samurai right now. A cinching ball tie. What is so cinching about it? Nothing is cinching about it. So, a ball tie, in the Japanese parlance, it's an ebi tie or a shrimp tie, is basically a tie where you force your bottom into a ball shape, so you make them squinch in on themselves. It's actually an excellent torture tie because it may not seem like it, but being forced in this position for more than say 5 minutes at a time actually gets rather uncomfortable very quickly because you're using all those back stabilizer muscles to keep yourself upright in a very inefficient way. So I like to use this as basically a waiting tie. It's like, hey, I'm not ready for you right now, but if you want to get in the rope, let me do this real quick, and I'll get to you in just a second, and let them suffer for a little bit. Consequence tie. Let's see what the consequences are. I see what it is. So it's a crotch rope that ties in the front, loops in the back, then it goes up to the ankles. In my experience, that actually causes more pressure on the back of in the butt rather than across the crotch. So your mileage may vary with this one. And yep, that's exactly what it's going for. So a T-back, what is this about? I actually tie something kind of similar to this. I tie it very differently though. And yeah, I see what it's doing though. It's called T-back because it's an inverted T in the back. It's not bad. I don't really have any faults for this one. Let me see how the routing goes. This routing is way more complicated than it needs to be. So they tie the chest harness, which is fine. And then they split the rope and go in opposite directions around each upper arm above the elbow. And that's way more complicated than it needs to be. Because the easier way to do this is to not split your rope and just start wrapping around both of them. And you may need to contort your bottom a little bit to get that to lay nice and easy. But it's way easier to manage the one line going in one direction than to manage two going in opposite directions. Because he's even spiraling one up and one downward, which I don't understand why you create that extra work for yourself. I'm not sure I'd recommend from this position actually grabbing a hold of this too hard. But I mean, it's probably fine. The strap-on harness, I've tried to tie this, and I think it's way more complicated than it needs to be. A basic crotch rope with an extra knot. So you tie the waistline, you put the dildo in, you tie a knot the bottom, and you just continue your crotch rope. I find works just as well. Oh, the head cage. This is actually kind of famous in the community for being really silly, and it looks super silly. It's moving on. All right, so I have tied this. I've never gotten it to work as intended. So basically, what you do is there's multiple ways of doing the start. You can do a fancy box knot. You can do what's the word? You can do half hitches, not half hitches, but you can do whatever you want to capture the middle three fingers, and then you pull that back toward the elbow in some fashion. The way they're doing it now is with running half hitches or sail knots, and so by doing that, the bottom in this case can't pull his wrist forward. In my experience, this doesn't work, and the reason is that joints become more limber the more they're forced to bend. So this will be tight when the rigger starts. This will not be tight in about 5 minutes, and they'll just wrench their wrist forward, and it won't bother them. So in my experience, this doesn't work. If someone has a method to where this does work, I'd really like to hear it though, because I like the idea. This is exactly the same thing. It's just with toes, and it's anchoring to the calf muscle, which is a concept I definitely want to go over more in the future, using muscles to anchor your rope if you're tying parallel or need to get a line parallel to a limb, because the only way to do this is to basically use the fact that the calf muscle is wider than, the ankle. So you can tie up to that and get a knot around the muscle, because that's one of the few things that's safe to tie tight against is muscle. So that's a concept I definitely want to go over more in the future. The foot web, I've definitely done that. It's very pretty, but not terribly useful. I just do it for pictures. Intermediate harnesses. What's so intermediate about it? This is a rope corset that just. I feel like this is more like here's a rope corset. This is how you use your extra rope when you're done. Um, so yeah, it's just a rope corset, and they did a double coin knot, and then it comes over the back, and yeah, that's nothing special. Pony harness. I really wonder how they name these things because I don't know why it's. I guess because it has reins in the back. But once again, I feel like that's just like I ran out of rope, or I thought it would take 50 feet of rope. That's like maybe 30 tops. What are they doing? Butterfly harness. Yeah, sure, that's pretty. That's fine. Lover's harness. Once again, I'm really curious how they name these things. So this actually reminds me of the dragonfly sleeve because it starts the same way. Um, although I guess it's a true lover's knot, so that's how they name it. So they're using the knot name to talk about the harness. Okay, so yeah, basically you just do your lover's knots. I imagine the double slipped knot at the beginning of the book would work just as well. You come up through, you form a crotch rope, and basically you do the same thing you do for Karada, where you just come up the back and you grab each side, you come to the back, you tie another knot, you come to the side, grab the front, go to the back, and over here they're tying up there, which is not typical of these types of body harnesses, but it works just as well. It probably also relieves the issue that the more typical style of harness has, where you'll tighten up on the crotch too much as you go. So that's fine. Standard tie off. I'm always worried when they talk about standards because half the knots in these books don't look standard at all to me. Um, but I mean, to be fair, Kink.com's out in California and I'm on the East Coast, so maybe it's a regional difference. Maybe that's what all these like weird like idiosyncrasies are. Similar thing, you're just doing bar wraps in order to get down so you're not requiring the model to be as flexible. Advanced harnesses. Let's see how advanced they are. This hip harness. It is definitely advanced, but I don't like it. Because it only loads from one direction. Because it looks like it's designed to load entirely on the back so that the front is supported. Which isn't bad, but it's not ideal either. I personally believe that you should try to be as versatile as possible. So, because you never know if halfway through your tie, if your bottom's gonna have a problem, or you'll have an idea and realize, like, man, I really wish I could flip this over, but there's absolutely no support on the back for this, so I can't flip it over. So I'm not saying it's a bad harness, I'm just saying it's not as versatile as a lot of other ones. The sidearm harness, I've tied different variations of trying to accomplish the same thing, and I find they don't really work that well. Let's see, are these Kanuki? Yeah, they're Kanuki. So when you take the rope from, is that what they're doing? Or are they slip knotting? They're slip knotting? Why? But why though? Because at first I thought that they were going to come to the back and then pass up around through the front to do what, once again, we call in the Japanese style a kanuki, which is to prevent someone from slipping the rope up over their shoulders. But no, they're just pulling the rope back and then passing it through itself and doing a lark's head that the model's just sliding their arm into. And I don't understand why. That's... I hate this. I hate that there's nudity in these books. All right. Well, I'm already here, so I guess I'll censor in post. So, all that being said, there's not much to say about this. So it starts off, so this is Japanese style, where you do a lark's head in the back and centered on the back. So it's going to do across the front, above, across the front on the bottom. It's going to grab in between. I believe this was a Japanese pearl harness in the first book. And then it's going to grab these, and it's going to grab the wrists. And then it's going to pull. Okay, I see what it's doing here. So it's coming up over the shoulders so that you're pulling all these knots up. So typically, we call this a TK or a box tie because in the back, the arms form a square. Typically, with this sort of tie, you actually start with the wrists and pull them up to where you want them to be, and then you start your torso wraps. And then once you're done your torso wraps, then you put that knot in the middle to anchor everything, so that the distance between the wrists and the wraps stay constant. And the reason you want to do that is because if you do it this way, the way the book is showing you, is that if you pull the wrists up after the fact, you actually create a lot of slack in this knot. And that can lead to one of these ropes coming loose. And one rope comes loose, more ropes can come loose. And then you have a differential in tightness from one rope to the next, which can cause binding. It can cause rope burning because that's more likely to slide at that point. It can cause bruising. It can cause contact abrasion, which I guess is a fancy word for rope burn. So it's not ideal. So typically for this type of harness, you would actually start with the wrists and then do the chest rather than doing the chest first and then grabbing the wrists afterward. More decorative stuff, which is totally fine. It looks pretty. Star back harness. The back of that does not look like a star, so I'm not sure why it's being called that. But I mean, it's pretty enough. Also, a fun thing that most of the previous crotch ropes haven't done is that this crotch rope is spread, which is significantly more comfortable for the bottom you're tying, regardless of which equipment they have downstairs. So if you want to be nice to your bottom, or if they're going to be in it for a while, just make sure you split your ropes because it's way more comfortable. Stacker harness. I guess it's because you're stacking double coin knots. Once again, purely decorative. I wouldn't load this in any way. And that's it. All right, so the glossary. So parts of rope. I kind of wish this is at the beginning of the book, because there's actually a few places in the book where it refers to bites and loops and coils and standing ends and working ends, but it's defined at the end. I feel like most of this could have stayed in the back, except for this picture. I think this picture should have been at the very beginning of the book, so people could see, because you don't need a written definition of bite when you see that, because I know what that means. The only thing here that might require more definition is standing end versus working end. The standing end is the long end. It's the end that's going off and doing stuff. The working end is the end that you're actually working with. So the standing end might be, the end that's tied to a bed frame. It's the one that might be tied to something else over there. It might just be the other end of the rope you plan on doing something with later. The working end is the short piece of rope that you're working with now. So I also use these terms, and I know I get a little bit of flack for just using jargon randomly. So I know that's not ideal. So I'll try to make sure I define my terms in the future. But that's it. That's a bite. That's a loop. That's what we refer to as coils, standing end, and working end, the parts of a rope. Let's see. I've never seen anybody use the term fistance before. That's kind of funny. That is an accurate definition of Hojojutsu, because I see lots of inaccurate definitions of it, which is nice. Let's see. Anything else? Yeah. The 2-finger rule is important. Shibari. I don't know, I get so annoyed at the whole Shibari/Kenbaku thing. Maybe I'll do a video of that in the future. And about the authors. Good old JD and Dan with their lovely photographer. And that's the book. So that's more or less what I thought of the book as a whole. I'll do a more concise review as well. Who knows, maybe that'll come out first, because that'll be easier to make probably. So for $22, I think this book is definitely worth the price. There's more interesting things in here. There's more in here, period. Let's see. Does it say? So 61 ties. I believe the last one had. Got my notes from the last video right here. Had 37. So they almost doubled the number of ties in the book, which is wonderful. They're in full color. There are clarification arrows in some of them, which is wonderful because if you recall, one of my issues with the previous book was that because it was black and white and because of the rope they selected, some of the ties were unclear. So they put some arrows for clarification to help and also to give you more contrast, which is super nice. And overall, I think this one's actually worth purchasing. I think if someone were asking me if they should get both books, I would say don't bother the first one and just get this one because I think this one includes all the important stuff from the previous book. So that's it. So that's the long form of Back on the Ropes by the Two Naughty Boys. Please like, favorite, and subscribe because I hear on YouTube you're supposed to say all of those things. And thanks for watching. Thanks.